Welcome to the Village Talks. This is a space where physiology meets lived experience, where we talk honestly about the body, the nervous system, relationships, and the real questions families are asking without fear-based narratives or a one-size-fits-all answer. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Jamie.
And I'm Dr. Brittany. We're chiropractors, perinatal specialists, and humans who work closely with families through preconception, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and early parenthood. Whether you're preparing for pregnancy, currently pregnant, newly postpartum, raising a little one, or supporting someone who is, you're in the right place.
Let's get into today's conversation.
Welcome to today's episode. Today we're doing a brief conversation, because this is a really big conversation, but a brief conversation about primitive reflexes when it comes to our infants and how they impact us later on in life, potentially, things to look out for, the differences between them. It's a really big topic, especially right now. I feel like in the social media world, everyone's like, ooh, primitive reflexes, this is fun. But I mean, this is something I learned when I was in school in our pediatric classes, like 2016 and that. And I think maybe it is taught in chiropractic school more often than not in the pediatric classes, because chiropractic inherently revolves around the nervous system, and primitive reflexes have to do with nervous system development. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember it being talked about and discussed through every developmental anatomy class that I had, like college. Chiropractic school definitely gets covered a lot in our postgraduate pediatric training. I think that a lot of people who work with infant development and infant body work are more versed in it than the average, population for sure. But I do think it's getting more attention in recent years, because we are seeing a lot more kiddos struggling with issues that come back to the nervous system. Right. And so in order to be able to help infants and children with issues that stem from the nervous system, we have to have an understanding of the nervous system, how it develops, how rapidly it changes in those early months of life. And sort of what is this normal process, and how a lot of the things that we've developed as parents and in our current society and culture interfere with the integration of these reflexes and the normal motor development that we expect to see. And what can we do to offset some of this interference or help kiddos integrate this later? Because if they don't integrate normally and naturally at the correct time, they can still be integrated later. It just has to be intentional.
Absolutely. And there's different movement patterns and things that we have to walk them through and kind of go back to where it fell off on the trail and reintegrate it so we can continue forward is how I like to explain it to parents. And I think you can jump in here too, but my opinion about primitive reflexes might be a little bit different just based off what I've seen in practice. A lot of times, primitive reflexes, when they aren't integrated, and the word is right, they're retained. They haven't gone into the system the way we would like them to, so we can progress further into our motor skills and things like that.
Well, even explain that, right? Because I think people think they go away, right? Or they, even a parent's understanding of what does it mean to integrate a reflex? Like, what is this process? Like, even that, I don't think that's something most parents understand. Sort of the nuances of that language.
Absolutely. Even. And I'll just do like a brief description real quick about primitive reflexes. They are brainstem-driven, so part of that neurological process, and they're driven with movement programs that start in utero. And then what it means to integrate is that when we're going through our development, that they should be I'm trying to think, what's the word not for integrate? They should be blended into our development processes so we can hit these other motor milestones. Now, it's broken up into different categories, but before I get into that, when it means that they're retained or they didn't integrate, it means that they are still present. They're still there. We still see them in different ways. It goes into cognitive behavior. It goes into our attention. It goes into our gait, balance, and coordination. So we see, sure, that reflex might, not be as prevalent like it was when we were kids. in like infants, but what we start to see is that they shift the patterning that we have through our development. And sometimes they're just written off of like, well, they're just a clumsy kid. And I'm like, not necessarily.
Yeah.
There are factors that we can look into when it comes to, are they still here, or did they develop into our nervous system the way that they needed to?
Yeah. And I think, we call them primitive for a reason. They exist for survival.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
This is about these teeny tiny little underdeveloped, larvae mammals that we give birth to because of our giant brains. And so, a lot of these integrate early because they're no longer necessary.
Yes.
Right. So we don't need, these are reflexes that we don't need to carry through life. In fact, we need them to integrate so that we can develop additional reflexes and motor development can proceed. So that we are able to do all of the things cognitively and, with our brain, the connection between the brain and the body and the muscles and the joints, right?
So we're not stuck in survival.
Yes, exactly.
Yep. Yeah. And they're basically what primitive reflexes do is that they organize fetal positioning and they help assist with birth. Yep. That's why they start in utero. And then what happens is they lay down the foundation for our posture, for our coordination, for emotional regulation. And they emerge through movement. That's the biggest thing. So that's why in our practice, we're really, really big on movement for infants and not being stuck in carriers and all that kind of stuff, which we'll get into in a second. But that the main purpose for them is, well, specific ones. I'll break it down in a second. But for the main ones that get talked about a lot today are the more movement patterns that we're looking into. And my perspective on it, a lot of what I'm seeing a lot and why I wanted to bring this conversation up is because we're using primitive reflexes as the problem. Like, oh, you have all these behavioral things. Let's integrate this reflex and all will be well. Not necessarily, in my opinion. What I see more of is that in somewhere along the path, our nervous system got stuck in fight or flight. And when we're in fight or flight, which is that sympathetic dominant nervous system, right? So there's 4 different categories, flight, fight, freeze, or fawn. If we get stuck in one of those situations in terms of what our nervous system is doing, we can't progress into more motor movements and integrating those reflexes. Obviously, we're going to continue to develop, but the behavioral things that we're seeing is a result of what happened prior. And why I love working with moms in pregnancy, parents in pregnancy, is because that is also a factor. How was mom in pregnancy? How was partner in pregnancy through this? Did we have a lot of stress? Did we have something like hyperemesis? Did we have a place where we didn't feel safe? Because baby feels all of those chemicals that mom feels, and it's directly impacted to what we're seeing in baby once they're outside the womb. I don't know if you agree with that.
Absolutely. I think that the state of mom's nervous system in pregnancy is laying the foundation for the state of baby's nervous system when they arrive earthside. And so I don't want moms to freak out and think, oh my gosh, like I'm so stressed out all the time and I already have anxiety and what am I doing to my baby? And my baby's going to be anxious because of me. Nope. That's actually the exact opposite of what we need to be doing. What it means is that it is important for you to be able to focus on feeling safe, consistently engaging in activities that relax your nervous system, downgrade your nervous system. If you do have high emotional stress, you have high physical stress, you have high chemical stress, that do what you can, take action to reduce stress when and where you can. Don't beat yourself up over the stress because that increases stress. But this, people say self-care. I'm like, you can call it whatever you want. I think self-care has become synonymous with selfish, right? For women. Then don't call it self-care. Like your nervous system needs attention.
Absolutely.
And in pregnancy, it is just as important, if not more important, because everything that impacts you is going to impact your baby.
Absolutely.
Right? And so if you want to make an attempt to try to set your baby up for, calm early days, finding ways right now to regulate yourself is really beneficial because these can carry through postpartum as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep.
So if you were in a state of distress and were struggling to feed baby, baby's going to struggle too because they literally feel that from you. Whereas if you have some really good routines and tools around calming your own nervous system, on the flip side, in the postpartum period, you can still use these tools and literally have baby on you skin to skin.
Yep.
And it is a direct and indirect way for you to help them regulate their nervous system.
Yeah. Co-regulation for sure.
Yep.
Love it. Yeah. And, when it comes to primitive reflexes in general, there's a bunch of different categories and subcategories. The way I like to explain it is there are primitive reflexes that help build the foundation in the house. And then you have primitive reflexes that are the wiring and letting us know how the nervous system is maturing. So there's two different categories with it. We have our primitive reflexes that are related to the motor skills. And those are the ones that are kind of popular on social media right now. So that's going to be your startle reflex, which is your Moro reflex. It's going to be your spinal galant reflex. It's going to be the tonic labyrinthine reflex and all that kind of stuff. Rooting reflexes, those motor skills are really important. But then you have your other category of primitive reflexes, which are things like your palmar grasp reflex and your Babinski reflex and your plantar reflex and your Perez reflex, right? Those we'll talk about another time because even though they're small, they give us more insight to what's happening actually in the nervous system and in the wiring if they're retained and we're not seeing those integrate. But today we're going to talk about more of those motor skill reflexes. So that then is broken down to a bunch of other subcategories, which is why this is such a big topic. But you have your uterine reflexes. You have your transitional reflexes, you have the 3 neck reflexes, and then you have your postural reflexes. So the uterine reflexes are going to be your Moro, and they're going to be your rooting and sucking reflexes. And those happen in utero. Around 9 to 12 weeks into 32 weeks gestation is when we're seeing all of those start develop and doing their thing. And then they lay the foundation for feeding and communication and for safety. Those are the big ones. Those are the big 2 ones first that are our uterine reflexes. And then we have our transitional reflexes, which are the spinal galant reflex and then the tonic labyrinthine reflex, because we have our tonic and then we have our asymmetrical tonic and then we have our symmetrical tonic. So we'll get into that in a second because there's so many things. But those are where the spinal galant reflex helps with birth rotation and trunk rotation. And then the tonic labyrinth is our flexion and extension, right? So the forward and backward, right? Yep. And then the twisting and turning. Those ones are really important to help us get out of the birth canal.
Yeah. Every one of those, going back to a previous episode, and we said we'd touch on it again later, and we absolutely will. Like, baby has an active system to help them navigate the pelvis.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep,
this
absolutely.
all comes from these reflexes.
Yeah, and it goes into the cardinal movements of birth, which that's what we'll get into later. But they're there for a reason. Like especially with the tonic labyrinthine reflex, it helps build your foundation and your relationship with gravity, which is really nice and super important because when it doesn't get integrated and it's retained, it is going to affect our balance and our posture and things like that. Yeah. The next kind of segment into that are the 3 neck reflexes that we have. And so it is the ATNR, which is the asymmetrical tonic labyrinthine reflex. And then we have our symmetrical one. So the asymmetrical assists with like rotation and midline development, which is really important. And then the symmetrical one is our core. It impacts our core. And so what we see with something like tonic, again, is that saying yes, that flexion extension. And then the asymmetrical is the saying no and that rotation. And then the symmetrical is what we see when babies are getting in all fours on their trunk and they're doing the rocking back and forth, getting ready for crawling. That is what that reflex is. So it's not just like, oh, look, they're rocking and stuff like that. I check in it with all of our kiddos that we see in clinic. And I'm like, are they doing the rocking back and forth? It's not just because I'm like, oh, it's so cute. It's actually, I'm asking about what the reflexes are doing. And I may not say that to the parents because I don't want them to be concerned and things like that. But those are the things I'm looking for to seeing, are we hitting those motor milestones that we should be be hitting. And if we're not, here are ways that we can help integrate them and things like that.
Looking to see that the natural movements are happening that are going to integrate the reflexes.
Exactly.
Right? That this is progressing as we expect.
Yeah.
And I think, when you talk about the nodding and the shaking, like this can be something, we do have a lot of parents coming in and they're bringing babies in specifically because they only hold their head to one side.
Yeah.
Or they sleep with their head extended really far back.
Yep. Or they're stuck in flexion.
Yes.
Forward.
And I think a lot of parents are told like, oh, they'll grow out of it. And they might, but are they going to grow out of it past the point where their body would have naturally tried to integrate this reflex? And now something is interfered, whereas these actually could be signs that your baby's body is trying to integrate this reflex and it's unable to do so. Can we get some help here?
Absolutely. Right.
Is there somebody that can step in
Yeah.
so that we're not going to experience delays later. We're not going to see these motor milestones. We're maybe not going to need an intervention when they're in kindergarten.
Yep.
Which it could be the first time that your kiddo is trying to sit down in a classroom and trying to do a coordinated activity at recess. You know,
Absolutely.
I mean, these things can pop up at any point.
Yeah.
I know you have this happen all the time where you're, going through this education and parents are like, oh my gosh, like I can't do that, or I struggle with that, or that's what happens in my body.
It's my favorite conversation.
It's like, so, all of yours might not be integrated. It doesn't mean you don't develop into adulthood.
Totally.
So the goal here isn't like big and scary. The goal here is, I think, giving parents just kind of a baseline understanding of what are these reflexes?
Absolutely.
What are we looking for? And at what point do we maybe want to kind of have somebody check, or should we be concerned a little bit above and beyond the more casual conversations I think that happen on social media right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I love about these conversations is we're laying down the foundation of understanding of why you have certain patterns in your body and what we can do to help baby with their patterns in their body. Because that's why I love the conversation with parents, because it clicks for them. They're like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I had no idea. And it's more so of like, babies don't grow out of patterns, they grow into patterns, right? And this is why right here is because what is their nervous system when they are in utero and when they come out of utero that then is directly correlating to the patterns that they're going to start integrating and building into their system? And then how does that carry into adulthood? Because when we get parents, my favorite is like, how long do you think this has been in my body? I'm like, that's a great question. How was your mom in pregnancy?
Yeah.
What was your birth process? Did you crawl and stuff like that when you're like, this is such an in-depth conversation, but it brings light to a lot of different like skill sets that we may or may not have, and things that we can do to kind of help rework certain things and unwind some patterns in our system. Yeah. It's like such a fun one for me.
Yeah. And I think, when you're talking to an adult about, well, why is my pelvis rotated? Why is, sometimes we can talk about, how do you sit at your desk? How do you sit in your car? Oh, you still are active on a soccer league, right? Like there's all these things. We don't have these conversations with babies, right? Babies aren't choosing to only feed on one breast.
Yep.
Excuse me. It is that their nervous system is telling them what they can and can't do. Their nervous system is setting the baseline for what is safe in their body. And so when this baseline is altered, that's where we talk about setting the foundation for these patterns to develop.
Exactly.
These are not acquired patterns from how we move our bodies.
Yes.
These are foundational patterns that will impact you for the rest of your life.
They're milestones for a reason. Yeah. They're not suggestion points that we need these to happen.
They're important.
Yeah.
They're very important for what we consider to be normal development. And there's a range for normal.
Yep.
And if you can't hop on one foot and rub your belly and pat your head, that's okay.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can still be a successful human in the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But the goal is that babies, all of us as humans, are able to develop to the best of our ability, right? Yep. That we are, we talk about ordinary, we talk about extraordinary. Everybody's capable of extraordinary.
Yep.
There's nothing wrong with ordinary development.
Yep.
But if we as parents, every parent wants to give their kid the chance to be extraordinary.
Yeah.
And so if we can recognize when something is potentially developing in an alternative pattern, we as parents want to be able to step in and do whatever we can to remove that obstacle so that our kiddo still has a chance to be extraordinary and not experience limitations.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. And then back to some of the other ones, right? We have our writing reflexes that help align the body, that help align the spine with gravity. And that's our foundation for postural control. And those are all the reflexes that we want to integrate. And then we have our postural reflexes. We don't want those to integrate because those are what keep us upright and keep us in a good posture for the most part, bipedal, all that kind of stuff. Because you have your little tiny postural muscles that are all throughout the spine that are meant to do that one thing really, really well. So we don't want those to integrate. They basically shift our brains into cortical leadership instead of primitive survival. And we need those patterns to be there. But we can't always get there as effectively if these other ones don't integrate when it comes to our motor skills and our development and our posture. And when we're in an overwhelmed state, this is where we see the more behavioral things start to go with our reasoning and things like that in our development. And it's not that your kid wants to misbehave. It makes me so sad when it's like, well, they're struggling a lot and we have to do these certain things over here because they misbehave. I've seen it where parents get embarrassed in public because they don't feel like they have control over their kid. And it's not necessarily they want to control them. It's just that they don't feel that they have control and they don't have the reason why, like everything was fine. This went well. Like my friends had a similar situation and their kid isn't experiencing behavioral issues, but mine is. Like, what is going on? They just want answers. And this is one of those things where, again, we start with the nervous system, see what's going on there. And then if we can dampen it and get them out of that fight or flight nervous system, we can help integrate these more postural reflexes and these more motor skills and stuff like that. We don't want to skip crawling. I'm sorry. We don't. We want to make sure that it's there and integrated. And this is one of the things during COVID that a lot of people on this end of the spectrum were like, what recommendation are you recommending that they can just skip crawling and that's okay? It's not necessarily that like we just want them to crawl for a month. We want them to crawl well because it goes into everything else foundationally as well. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
I do hear, at all ages, my kiddo skipped crawling or they didn't crawl for very long or they only army crawled or that cross crawl patterning, there's no substitute for it in terms of neurological development. And so I think that, yes, with COVID, infants during COVID, my gosh, like we will continuously see the impact throughout each stage of development for many years to come. But I do think that there was a little bit of a reset for what we considered normal because we have less human interaction. We have babies only seeing partial faces with masks. We have babies being kept separate, which often meant we had to be contained. So, everyone was doing the best that they could through that time. But I don't think that it's fair to say this becomes the new normal.
Totally.
We set milestones and we talk about the importance of each of these developmental milestones for a reason. Those reasons still exist.
Yes.
Human development hasn't inherently shifted. And the necessity of these milestones has not changed. And so we can see a group of children in a number of different settings for a number of different reasons not hit milestones. We investigate that reason. We don't move the line. We don't reset the standard. And so, if your baby skipped crawling and they otherwise seem absolutely perfectly developmentally normal, awesome. Their body adapted and figured it out. But more often than not, that's not what we see. We see that when milestones are skipped and when these reflexes that need to integrate are not completely integrated, that they are struggling with concentration, they are struggling with balance, they are struggling with emotional regulation. Kids aren't defiant just to be defiant. That is a sign that their nervous system defaults to a state of fight or flight. Their nervous system defaults to a state of dysregulation. And their means of regulating, their means of control, when those are removed, we see what's underneath, which is we exist in a state of dysregulation.
Exactly.
And so by going back and assessing whether or not these reflexes are completely integrated, we can begin to unravel, as you said, like at what point on the path did we diverge? Can we go back to that point, get them back on track? Is it going to happen later for them? Yes. But can it still happen? Probably yes. And that's why understanding the reflexes is so important. And then understanding the potential signs or symptoms or indicators that we do want to kind of go back and try to support this kiddo's nervous system with an integration at this point.
Absolutely. And it is, when we talk about sympathetic fight or flight, is usually what we like when it comes to dysregulation. But there's the other half of it too, where like baby's completely dissociated or kiddo's completely dissociated. And those are like, oh, you know, we're 3 weeks in and my baby sleeps through the night. No, it feels really great, but there's something going on there where baby doesn't feel like they can be fully alert, because when they are awake, they're on high alert and it takes so much energy and then they crash. And that's a different situation and a different conversation as well, but they're all still related, right? It is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So your response might be, I freeze. And this is just where I live. And we see that a lot with kids with oversensory. They just they take it all in, and this is kind of their behavior. Versus the extreme opposite, where we're really overwhelmed and we can't regulate ourselves and we need really tight hugs and things like that. We see it in both ways. So it's not just this blanket black or white. This is what we see. This is what we don't see. We look into all the nuances when it comes to what's happening in their system.
And I think there's also, I think we're in an interesting time too in terms of what we consider to be normal behavior. Right. So we talk about there's the behavior that's expected, and you know, you go back a couple generations and children are to be seen and not heard, right? Like we've moved away from that a lot. And I think that, you know, as we look at the current generation of parents, there is more encouragement of independence, of, you know, these are little people too, and they have their own opinions. And, you know, if you want them to grow up and be able to speak for themselves and give consent, you know, I think we're seeing a pretty big shift in parenting in that direction. So we are often perceiving or receiving judgment when our kids don't behave properly out in public, or they struggle with behavior in a classroom. You know, your kids can't sit still. Of course they can't. They're 5 years old. They're not supposed to be able to sit still all day.
They're meant to be in their environment.
That's just it. So it's sort of like, is the misbehavior because the expectation is unrealistic, or is the, you know, quote, misbehavior because there is a challenge that they are experiencing within their body and their nervous system that doesn't allow them, potentially even for a brief period of time, to behave in the way that we expect them to. Right.
Absolutely.
And so I think, you know, there is so much attention given to the kids that can't sit still and are overstimulated. But yes, there is the other side of it. I think those kids get missed because they're sitting there and they're being quiet and they're not bringing attention to themselves. They're behaving. And if there are some kids who can fully engage and sit tight and be quiet, I think girls tend to be able to do this a little bit better than boys inherently. And then we also sort of program them to sit tight and be quiet and go along with it. And boys can be more energetic and more boisterous and not do. And so then we're like, oh, they're overstimulated or oh, they're understimulated. No, every individual human is different. So, you know, we can kind of paint this a little bit with a broad brush, but the goal of this conversation is just understanding, sort of what is the baseline and what are you seeing?
Yeah.
And if you do feel that your kiddo maybe falls outside of what we consider normal development, that we want to dig a little deeper. We don't just want to make assumptions about, oh, they're defiant, or, oh, they're really well behaved, or, oh, they have this problem or that problem.
Yeah.
No, like your kiddo this is an expression of their genes. It's an expression of their nervous system
and their environment.
We want them to thrive.
Yep.
And if there are signs that there are maybe some obstacles to them, being their most extraordinary selves, how do we support their system?
Yep.
In order to achieve that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not that these are pathological, right? Anything like that. But again, kind of to your point, we want to make sure that they can be extraordinary. We want to give them the best optimal tools that they can be to help them along in this process, right? There's a reason why babies are called sponges and kids are called sponges. They're learning inherent patterns throughout their entire life, but like 0 to 7 roughly, right? But when we're talking about primitive reflexes, in order for them to kind of like build these other patterns, roughly around 0 to 9 months is when majority of these should be integrated. There are some that take up to 3 years to integrate. And that's where I do see, instead of like the I don't like calling them the terrible twos, but we'll just go with it. But it's actually more of like the terrible threes, because that's when
the three-nager,
they start making that shift in their cortical brain, right? That's different. And they're like, oh, I'm perfecting my 5 senses. I am no longer like feeling all the things all the time. And this is weird. And who am I? And they go through this like mini identity crisis is what I call it. And it's not that they don't want to misbehave. They don't want to be bad kids and all this, but they're going through so many different changes. And I think it's way more empowering for parents to understand these topics and understand what is happening in their kiddos developmentally so they can best support them.
Yes.
Like they're not just emotional. Like, sure, like depending on your horoscope and things like that, we have people who are a little bit more emotional than not. But in terms of regulation, it's a very different topic.
I think supporting them through the struggle instead of fighting against the struggle is better for kiddos. And I think it's a lot more peaceful for parents.
Yeah.
And it can be empowering as a parent to understand why each of these stages is the way that it is, instead of just a constant comparison and thinking there is something wrong with my kid.
Yeah.
Or I did something wrong because this is happening.
Absolutely.
The more you do to support them through the struggle, the less challenging it can be.
Absolutely.
Every phase is challenging in its own way. Are you gonna support this, or are you gonna fight against it?
Yeah.
Because the fighting against it is hard and gets exhausting.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love this conversation. But I think that's a good stopping point. I wanted to just do like a brief overview. And then obviously if there's any questions when it comes to this information, we're going to dive deeper, of course. But just to kind of lay the groundwork and the foundation of this conversation, I think it's really important to differentiate like, all right, these are the motor skills. These are the other like more neurological ones that help with the wiring of the brain in that regard. And the take-home message that I want people to have is, again, this is not pathology. They are a blueprint for babies' development and for basically setting them up for their entire lives. And we really want them to have the best optimal setup because we care about you and we care about them. But birth is what activates them. They start in utero. Birth turns them on and is like, I'm awake. Like we can do this. And then movement is what helps integrate them. So we're really big advocates, especially for the families that we see in our practice, of not keeping baby in a container, putting them on the ground, letting them move and explore, putting them on their tummy. All of those are super important. Tummy time in my book is anything where they're not on their back. Holding them on your chest is really great. I love to utilize yoga balls. They're my favorite. Keep it after your pregnancy. The whole first year postpartum, you and baby both can utilize them for really wonderful benefit for movement. Safety is what helps refine our primitive reflexes and help us integrate into that because we don't want to rush our development. We just talked about that. And then what we try to do as best in our practice is honor the sequence and let them build on top of each other.
Yeah. And I think, topics for, as we continue this conversation, right, and talking about movement, what impedes movement, right? This is why we don't love containers. We will talk about swaddling. We will talk about snooze. We will talk about all of these things because we get these questions all the time.
Yeah.
So, part of the reason for touching on this topic specifically is there is a lot of information out there.
Yeah.
And this is the nature of the time that we exist in, right? There are a lot of opinions. There's a lot of stuff on social media. And so, we don't know everything about everything, but to be able to step in and share information with parents that is founded in evidence, founded in science, founded in our educations and our experiences. So if there is something specific that you want us to talk about in terms of primitive reflexes based on something you've seen or heard, or just questions that have come up, like please do drop it in the comments, because our future episodes are going to be influenced by what people want more information on that we can talk about in a longer format instead of in a shorter visit with parents, or through social media conversations, right? Through comments or DMs. So
cool. Awesome. Thanks for joining, everyone. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
If you found today's episode helpful, you can subscribe, share it with a friend, or leave a review. It helps this podcast reach the families who need it most. You can find us at Belly Bliss in Denver and online for resources, workshops, and support. Until next time, take care of your body and trust its wisdom.